Good morning and welcome for today's session, the first of a three-part series powered by Oracle on driving outstanding customer experience with personalization at scale. Today's agenda includes a presentation from Andy Fisher, Director, Marketing and Strategy with Oracle, followed by a panel discussion with Andy, Dr. Bhaskar Dasgupta, he's Director, Digital Infrastructures with Abu Dhabi Global Markets, Rania Yahya, Regional Director Marketing with Al Hokel Medical Group, moderated by Harsha Tawani, who's Head of Digital Marketing with KPMG. Before I let Andy Fisher kick off this session, I would like to remind our attendees that the Q&A function is active, so feel free to ask our panelists questions that will be answered in the last segment of the session. The chat function is also live, so feel free to interact with each other. Lastly, when prompted, please answer the poll question. All answers are, of course, anonymous now. Without further ado, let's welcome Andy Fisher. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Faris, and good morning, everybody. Great that you can join us today for this discussion. As Faris just said, I'd like to sort of spend the next 15 minutes tops, really just taking you through a point of view around sort of personalization at scale and what we're seeing as an organization. And hopefully that will stimulate some questions or support some questions that you guys have got we can then actually talk about in the session with the panel. And I'm looking forward to that. Having discussed some of these points with the panel yesterday, I think there should be some lively debate, and I'm hoping that you as the audience will be able to contribute to that. So without further ado, just want to sort of go through this. As we said, topic is around sort of the personalization at scale and where it goes. And I kind of wanted to really sort of start with a person who's not been so much in the press recently for personalization and selling things, more about what he's doing, hitting the atmosphere and seeing what he's doing with his rocket ship. But good old Mr. Bezos and what he's been doing there and his view on personalization. If you go back in time to 1998, where he probably would have said he was a bookseller, as opposed to today, which he pretty much sells everything. This was sort of Jeff's view at the time around personalization and the importance of personalization at the heart of his business vision. And it's clearly the idea that you are tailoring that experience and personalizing it to the individual. It's not one shop for 4.5 million customers, he says there. It's clearly an individual shopping experience for every one of their customers. And who can argue with him given his current situation and what he's able to do? So I guess one of the things for me particularly is, and this sort of is also influenced a bit by recent worldwide events as well. You know, we've talked a while now about things like the experience economy and where personalization fits into that as a key area. Now, from my perspective, when I sort of talk about experience economy, it's very much around the sort of these three key areas. And it's always a battle against time with experience. It's making sure that you've got with your target audience, you know, the right message at the right time in the right channel. And it's always a battle against those sorts of elements that you've got there. That whatever it is you're engaging with them, that it's very much focused on them as an individual and it's a personalized experience if you want it to be effective. And it's got to tug at the heartstrings. It has to be an emotional connection. It can't be just a straightforward transaction in that sense. It has to really resonate. And I think with recent events as well, overlays like making life as simple as possible for people with that digitization and digital experience that we've seen happen over the last 12, 18 months and the massive changes that have accelerated a lot of the trends that were there before, experience economy included. It's that sort of empathy with your target audience and what you're saying to them. That's become ever more important, and probably a level of social responsibility that we're sort of seeing in many markets, people expecting more from the people that they're actually dealing with as a supplier. For me, one of the examples I found quite interesting was prior to the pandemic, you had people like Nespresso. Their advertising was driven very much by images of George Clooney and sophisticated sort of coffee drinkers. Now, the advertising that I see locally is very much around the recyclability of those coffee capsules and the way that it goes. It's that shift that we've actually seen. So I guess when just before this all sort of kicks, this is really the end of 2019, start of 2020. We as an organisation were very intrigued as to what the general view was around the experience economy and what people were actually looking for on that basis. And we ran a sort of some primary research with the help of the e-consultancy team aimed at 502 CMOs who were actually there and what their general opinions were. So quite intriguing. As I said, 502 in the sample, and also from that point of view as well, 16 very detailed interviews with a group within that to get a more sort of deep level of understanding, should we say, at that point, to see what's going there. And clearly the experience economy is all about, pace and being more frenetic, the fact that consumers have an ever-increasing choice. They want to interact with you when it's a relationship that's valuable to them, and their expectations of responses in milliseconds, such as taxis in minutes, packages that are arriving within hours, etc., and having the required experience, getting the output that they want in all these different micro moments that are taking place. It's no longer really that nice linear journey that we like to think of. If you go back to the 40s and 50s of that awareness, interest, desire, sort of conviction and action type approach and the way that it works, it's very much people starting in different places, looking at all the different micro moments and interactions that they've got and working their way through all those. It's really, how do we respond to those people as these journeys go backwards, forwards, left, right, and centre? And interestingly, from the view of these 502 CMOs that we're talking about, their view was, they say, customers expect all their interactions that you see here to be in context, regardless of whichever channel that they're interacting with you on, or whatever that particular purpose is. They expect that to be in context. They expect you to know that and the way that it works. That's so you can see there. They also expect it to be personalized, making sure that it's, ideally a preferred channel, it's a convenient time of day, and it's the right content. And more, they're expecting this in a real-time sort of response in the way that all operates. So quite a lot of pressure. So quiz time. Here we go. Let's see if this works. So that's my sort of initial thought. Here we go. We want for you guys. So we asked this question of the 502 CMOs in terms of, what word best describes their approach to customer experience delivery. And I'm very intrigued now. We should be launching the poll, hopefully, that will actually say, what is your view of these 4 words? Which one best describes your approach to customer experience and what it is? So please pick one of the 4. Which one you think best represents how you're dealing with customers and what experience you're trying to deliver? How are we doing, Faris? Are we there? We're getting a few answers in.
Yes, we're getting quite a few answers indeed. I think we'll be good to share the results right now.
Okay, shall we see the results? Very, very interesting. A valuable experience. That's very interesting. On the basis that if we now look at what the 502 CMOs actually said, what they went for primarily, this is hoping his screen is going to move on. What they saw as a single word was they actually thought effortless or frictionless is another variation of it. You may have seen in a lot of the research around this was the most important thing. Any difficulty in engaging with them as an organization. And again, this is back to some of the overlays since then around, making it as easy as possible for people's lives, making that whole experience as effortless as possible was the best way that they saw to actually get the results in terms of the interactions, the engagement, and the revenue through as the sort of way forward. So nothing wrong with being valuable, absolutely right. But I think it was very much for them, that effortless piece was the factor that underpinned actually delivering that value for both parties and the way that it works. And then within those sort of the views of the 502 that we're talking about and the way that it goes, when it comes to personalization, they, as you can see from this particular chart that's there, and the yellow ones are the top performers. And the top performer was characterized as an organization in the previous financial year that had smashed its targets, that exceeded what it needed to do as a business. And for everyone else, the mainstream were either those who had simply met their targets or perhaps had fallen short. So it was very interesting to see in terms of personalization, the ones who were excelling were excelling across the board in comparison to their less successful competitors or peers, depending on what it was they were looking at. So very much the obvious ones of personalizing at the individual level, the sort of the typical sort of name type of stuff. That sort of personalization was quite prevalent across the board. But when it came to the more sophisticated use of data and engagement and that experience that's been delivered, it was very much the top performers who were investing into things like personalization across the customer journey, making sure that online and offline experiences aligned and delivered what people wanted, that it was increasingly mobile, as we know. And I believe from your region as well, we've got typically a sort of a younger target audience, a more affluent, professional, and very much mobile type of thing. It was the leaders in this particular space, which is predominantly sort of North America and Europe, which I hadn't sort of maybe said at the start, but that was also a key thing for them. And more this personalization in real time, being there in these individual micro moments that people are actually being measured in. So maybe food for thought, guys, in terms of what you got and something we can discuss later. I was looking for the links because obviously I just said that our research at that time was more geared around sort of North America and Europe and the way that we were going. And I was looking for sort of parallels in your region. I'd love to hear your experiences and thoughts later on the panel discussion. And looking at this particular one that I picked up, this sort of marketing maturity for the Middle East, as a survey done by Manthan and Rich Relevance, that clearly personalization or hyper-personalization was clearly on the agenda and for people, according to their research. So again, good to see what you guys are thinking out there. And in terms of, again, similar to what we were sort of saying, it seems to be there is a group that's leading it, but there's still an awful lot for the vast majority of organizations to deliver on. So something, again, we'd like to explore as we get into our panel discussion later. So if we go down one, I just wanted to quickly discuss, what is personalization and where it sits. And I think there are three levels to look at from this point of view. There's kind of the first level, which is more focused on us as marketers, very much around sort of the targeting aspects of it and how we can actually make that as efficient and effective as possible. I think there's a level then that comes beyond it with customization. And again, this moves away from it being more top of the funnel, more the things that we're talking about there, as we start to get to know people and actually move from that sort of initial awareness and interest capture into something that's more around the sort of consideration and conversion phases of where people are actually going. And the kind of things that people are obviously engaging with then, particularly in a more, digitized world, it's again what they're interacting on the website. Are they again the right currency pop up when they're buying? Are they configuring things? What is it you've got that's interactive on the website? All those kinds of things are part and parcel of this sort of customization phase and where it's going. Then the final one level on that in this sort of three-tier approach is the individualization. And it really starts to turn into a known customer, or at least a known convert you've actually got and what you're delivering there. And that is where you start to see the use of things like customer data platforms, AI and machine learning, that sort of real omni-channel engagement. Those things come more and more to the fore as the actual interaction becomes more one-to-one as you begin to understand them as an individual and the way that it goes. So in the types of data that you can actually see there as well, what underpins each one, as you can see from this one, quite simply, we've got the contextual data for targeting, more about audiences and the way that it fits. Clearly, as we start to learn more, and it may be pseudonymous data, so I might know your email address, I might be able to see what you're tracking on the website. We start to learn a little bit more about the sort of behavior of a potential individual. There may only be a silhouette of that person, we don't really know them yet. And then finally, when you get into what's becoming ever more important, the first party data and the way that it sits, that's obviously when we begin to deliver a more sophisticated experience in the way that it goes, and we can bring more data to bear to actually make that as effective and efficient an engagement as possible. And we get to see that frictionless experience and the value delivery that we talked about earlier. So I just wanted to quickly share, conscious of time, so I want to get on to the panel discussion, a couple of examples. So I want to share this about sort of the customization phase. And this is sort of taken from a UK one. I do apologize, it's a local one, but it's for me, but it's quite intriguing, I think, how they've used the data. and the way that it's operating. So in this sort of second phase, basically we have an organization here who are an existing Oracle customer experience cloud customer. They've invested quite a significant amount in their website, and they really want to get the best out of that, both for themselves, but also for customer experience. And what they were finding is that people who had, this is more of a service experience kind of relationship, what they needed to do was make sure that people are actually getting the most out of the online information that they spent a lot of time and money making available. What they were seeing is that people would get so far on their journey, but at some point would then drop off, pick up the phone and ring their call center. Clearly, they didn't want to do that unless it was absolutely necessary, because that impacted the experience of both the person actually calling the call center or potentially somebody who wanted to call the call center with a more sophisticated request that really did need a one-to-one interaction. So what they need to think of was, who are the ones who are showing behavior that is likely to lead to somebody leaving and calling the call center versus those that don't? And for those that were more likely to leave, what could they actually do to make sure that that request was satisfied within the web channel and make it more an effective, efficient, and I suppose, and that's a more frictionless and valuable experience for them. So the way they went about it is it was looking at sort of the analytics of the AI and the ML aspects of it, and used sort of predictive streaming data. And for those sort of analytical geeks out there, it was a Markov-Midden model. I'm afraid my statistics doesn't go far enough to explain exactly what that is, so I'd save that from the time if you're interested. But in essence, what they were doing was looking at behavior. You know, what are the, in the 5 clicks, you know, who looks like they're going to drop off based on their behavior and call the call center, and could we do something differently at that point to actually keep them there on that particular channel and answer their question. Hence why when they were testing this, that anybody who went through this process were also part and parcel of a sort of a customer voice of customer survey approach of, did you find what you needed today? So it wasn't saying you were aimlessly deflecting people from the call center, is you were deflecting them from the call center, but we were satisfying the need that they actually had. And it's very successful. So from this point of view, it's again, people are sort of, as it shows in the white box there, what the sort of high level process is. And based on this model, these 5 clicks, what is it that you could actually do within self-service to keep them there and answer the question effectively? Whether that was more content, as you can see at the far right, taking it to an FAQ section, or engaging a chatbot to actually start that process and start to give a bit more of a guided assistance in the way that it goes. So from a results perspective, within 2 months, they were seeing a successful call deflection and satisfied customers higher than 10%. And Vince, who's the guy who's in charge of this at the client, what he's saying is expecting that to rise to over 20% successfully handled through this process by the end of this calendar year. So it's just again showing the, you know, that use of the data, the AI, the ML, and actually that content. What can you actually serve to help customize that particular experience? And then just to finish off the session before we get into the panel, so I'm hoping it's a stimulating thought and debate in your own minds that you can share with us. Clearly, we talk a lot as marketers around so that personalization and that sort of tension, which you may get into debate shortly with Bhaskar, around that privacy compliance, which we're having to do in this sort of cookieless world. And there's always that tension between marketers and the sort of privacy and data specialists within an organization. How do you deliver that personalization when you have to satisfy ever increasingly more sophisticated privacy, data privacy and data security requests? And what we're seeing is, and our view on this is that there is now a renewed focus on first-party data, and it's how you activate that data across multiple touch points using a customer data platform. Something we offer to the marketplace, but more interesting for you guys, it's something that we've actually sort of integrated now into our marketing process, and where that is being used to activate the orchestration, whether that's digital advertising, whether that is through social, whether that's through the sort of email and omnichannel orchestration as well. Where you've got individuals that are actually known individuals, again, what we're seeing is that it's going to be the ability to have sort of ID, customer ID type profiles from a variety of different sort of sources, whether it's going in a sort of consumer sort of centric ecosystem and bringing those into your customer data platforms, depending on where people are in their journey. And the other thing as well here that I want to sort of finish off on is we have, I guess as marketers, we've become a little bit lazy, should we say, about our use of third-party cookies and the way that it goes. And what we're seeing now is this push towards contextual intelligence. And what we're looking at there is getting into the mindset of individuals who are looking at, what are they looking at, our target audience? What do they consume? Where are they? And then making sure that we're placing our content to excite them at the top of the funnel in relevant places that are appropriate in terms of not just the audience, but a brand safe, etc., and the way that we go. And the one example I sort of almost like to finish on at this point is we've done this work over the last sort of 12, 18 months with Disneyland in Paris. And again, this is an organization that did a lot of digital advertising. And what they were finding is that that was becoming less effective. And what we've actually done here is, again, this contextual intelligence, giving them audiences to select from that allow them to say, okay, who, given our target audience, what are they looking at? Where are they looking at it? How do we find more of those people and being able to activate those different audiences through that kind of different channels that are relevant? And we can see on the slide there, this sort of the cost per acquisition, a massive improvement of where it goes and a big improvement in conversions and the way that it works. So I'm conscious of time and I may have slightly overrun, so I do apologize to that one. But I just want to finish with this thought from McKinsey, and their view is that personalization, a prime driver of marketing success within the next 5 years. And from my personal point of view is it's all about the data. It's all about activating the data. So we may get that shortly as a question around AI, ML, gathering that information and activating it effectively at scale is a crucial piece. And really that's what I wanted to say from my point of view. So hopefully that's stimulated some debate and thought in your own minds. Looking forward to hearing from it. Really, Hardash, if you want to sort of take over at this point, we can sort of move towards the panel.
Yes, thank you so much, Andy. It was indeed a very insightful presentation. And I think the last part of your presentation resonates really well with me as a consumer as well as a marketer. I think a variety of factors have increased consumer sensitivity to how their personal information is gathered, stored, and used. And still, a majority of customers expect and want the businesses to know their preferences and needs. So I think the challenge for marketers is to ensure that they create the right type of balance between delighting the customers with personalized offerings while keeping their data secure. Now, in context of the region, and Dr. Bhaskar, I think I will direct this question to you. What kind of data privacy measures or compliances do you think are in place to safeguard the data? And are there any regulatory restrictions in place in the region for using cookies, etc., to track the user behavior?
I work for Abu Dhabi Global Market, which is Abu Dhabi's international financial center. And to answer your question, Harsha, yes, we are English common law based, perhaps the only jurisdiction between Singapore and London which looks after it. And the standards are pretty high. Early part of this year, we released our data protection rules, which are quite closely matched with what GDPR does. And I would perhaps say that that is the furthest that any regulator has imposed any kind of restrictions or guidance on how to manage data. It broadly falls into the following categories. One is we have an information commissioner now. So there is actually somebody to whom people can go and speak to about issues relating to privacy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's number one. Second thing is we have defined a whole range of things and activities and reporting and responsibilities that firms who opt into our jurisdiction have to fulfill. So that's about having a sunset clause or the ability to forget people or not collect more information that is required, et cetera, et cetera. And the last piece is there are stringent requirements for people who do suffer breaches. Look, I mean, every day we hear about data breaches happening. So I don't think we can ever be 100% sure that no data breach can happen. But we are pragmatically expecting those things will happen. And we have put together a regulatory mechanism so that you can report and actually manage those breaches that do end up happening. That said, there is a whole program that we have rolled out, educating people as to both on the data owners' perspective as to what are their rights, and people who actually control data or manage data or process data as to what they should do. We are trying to educate the entire ecosystem on what they can do and what they can't do. You may actually turn around and say that, look, these restrictions can actually stop the use of data from being marketed or being used to, as you said, delight. You are absolutely right. But at the end of the day, one thing that people have to recognize is that once your data leaks out, it is out there. To give you an example, biometric data or financial data, once it gets leaked out, it can have an awesome amount of very high amount of risk for the individual consumer. And of course, as it goes up the value chain to corporates, it can have even more impacts. So we try and assist people to do marketing. So we have, for example, specific guidance on third-party providers who can help people make better financial decisions. So we regulate them, but also on the other hand, we have protection as well. So to answer your question, yes, both we are trying to encourage better use of data, but also in a safe, protected way.
That's amazing. And I think our question from one of our attendees is on that topic only. If there's a success story you could share. And Andy, I think you were typing something. Do you want to say something here?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it's a very broad topic. I mean, go into far more detail than we've got time for now. The three quick hits I would have said, two of which I presented. Data management stories, I would say, are on those three levels. The targeting one is obviously Disneyland that we just finished with. I think that's a very clever use of data, but also within the bounds of privacy. Because you've already said, you've got this paradox going on, the personalization paradox. You've got increasing numbers of millennials out there. So millennials by 2025 are going to make probably about 75% of the global workforce. So they want personalization, but at the same time, they want privacy. And it's very difficult that if you sit too far, if you de-risk it completely, as many organizations want to do, it makes you pretty ineffective when it comes to beating the competition who have managed to sort of balance that. And it is as much an art form as it is a science. So Dr. Bhaskar is right. You've got to try and minimize the risk, but there is never going to be a situation of no risk. And this is the difficult dance that people are having to do at the moment, which is finding that balance. So back to the examples. For me, targeting Disneyland's a great example, and there are many more now. I mean, in fact, we were talking yesterday around some of the stuff I'm doing with pharmaceuticals in this space, and I'm waiting for Rani to talk about what she's got as well in the medical area, where they're trying to find the balance around targeting. Customization is the one I've shared, which I think is just a very clever use of pseudonymous data in terms of that modeling approach and how they were doing it in a sort of a customer experience, more service-oriented approach. But we've got the same principle being applied anywhere, whether it's a mortgage application or in different companies now. We're seeing it more and more people thinking about that. And then I think in targeting, there's another one which Malini can talk about as well. We're doing recently, it was announced, was internet stores in Germany. And what internet stores are doing is using very much the focus on first party data and the behavior of what people were doing at a very granular level to try and expand that sort of relationship and engagement and really let the data drive that personalization and drive that sort of individualization of the interactions that actually got. So it's very high level. It's not very detailed, but happily email me afterwards and I'll send you more detail on those. But those are my sort of quick three.
And now that you've mentioned pharmaceuticals, let's come to that.
Yes.
I am fascinated to see the way healthcare is transforming, especially in last 2 years. During the pandemic, personalized medicine, the tailoring of medical treatments to each patient, it's becoming so common. So, like, how do you strike that balance between delighting the customers and actually, making sure that their data is safe? So what are your 2 cents on how marketers should do it?
Actually, it was the hardest time through the pandemic. Each one is afraid to get to hospitals, clinics, etc. So actually, it helps a lot that the digital transformations. And let me say something. There is something with transformation about using a special CRM that helps a lot and much for securing the data, personalization, customization, even if you are talking to your customers, especially in medical and pharmaceutical. It's very sensitive area. While the data we are using, security refers to general practice of protecting sensitive information. That time we use a lot of, content, campaigns, talk about trust and privacy with our patients. Each and other patient is different than the cases we are treating different. So it's a huge data. You need to talk to your patients, give them the trust that their informations are secured. Let your employees also talk about the security of the information and the CRMs with the campaigns and the contents.
That's like building trust in your customers.
Sure. Yes. And we get some of our patients saying storytellings about their journey and customer experience with the trust of their information and security.
That's amazing. So also, that makes me think about the next level of personalization. And Andy, you talked about hyper personalization. A lot of brands across the world are using hyper personalization to tailor their marketing to individual customers. Now they're creating custom and targeted experiences through the use of data, analytics, AI, and automation. So how effective do you think that has been in the region? And Bhaskar, I would like to understand this from you. How effective do you think it has been in the region?
So in organization, I would say that the awareness is definitely increasing. People are getting conscious more and more. And something that kind of riffs off the previous thing that I had talked about, we still tend to think about our provision of services on a national level. But the one thing that you mentioned was what's happening in the region. Actually, what my point would be is that, especially when we are talking about it from a regulatory perspective and from a marketing perspective, I would actually encourage people to think globally. Mm-hmm. You see, what's happening is that data is starting to, as in how people start getting interested in data, they are all getting into small country level, little pools. Now, that is very inefficient. People want to buy services from across the world and want to have a consistent behavior of what they get from various suppliers across the world. So to give you an example, that's why GDPR is almost like a gold standard, and almost every jurisdiction is starting to use that as the gold standard. So once a marketer actually starts utilizing a GDPR or a GDPR equivalent regime, then you know that you can start pushing out your services almost at a global level. And because of that, what happens is that when marketers from a non-GDPR or a place which doesn't have any restrictions or guidance, they come back and start pushing out their hyper-personalized recommendations. What we have seen is that customers react, how did they know about this? This must be spam. I don't like this. Or they delete it. So the reaction is almost like not what you want. So I think it's slowly rising, the interest and knowledge of the fact that data is yours. If you're not paying for a service, then you are the payment. Your data becomes the payment. I think people are slowly starting to understand the implications that you need to worry about what data is being used. And just because it's getting hyper-personalized, that means people know things about you. So whether you're talking about cookies, whether you're talking about data that is being available, the worry is starting to come up.
Yeah, I understand that. And Andy, what do you think, like, working with Oracle and other organizations, what do you think is the most important in case organizations decide to leverage real-time data and AI to build, an even more customized buyer experience?
But I think it's back to this, what we said about the personalization paradox, and pick up on what Bhaskar just said there, is it's got to be relevant and in context to the relationship. So data is important. What I do see, though, is that quite a lot of marketers have a habit of just throwing everything in there and storing every little bit of data on a just-in-case basis. And you really can't do that. It doesn't work from a operational perspective. It doesn't work from a legal and sort of regulatory perspective. Is there. You've got to have a clear view. And I would say, starting with a view on what is it you want to do that's going to help differentiate you as an organization in terms of that experience, and make sure that is, as Bhaskar was just saying, is that what people want? Will they understand what the value is, and therefore are prepared to go along with this as a process to share that valuable personal information because they're actually going to get something in return? So it's things that we're talking, I was asked that question earlier around examples. The internet stores, when I just mentioned a second ago, it's the fact that we're looking at, what they offer is outdoor equipment, and you want to buy your mountain bike or you want whatever it is that you want to do for your outdoor sport. And clearly what they're looking at is, how do they make those sort of interactions? What people have got, how do they sort of bring them into almost the community of being an internet store's customer and part of that family? Is, how do I make that experience more relevant for you? That when you're looking at spares for your mountain bike or whatever it is, I'm looking at, what are your preferences, but also what are your implicit behaviors, but using that, as Bhaskar says, don't make it look like you're stalking them. If you're going to store them, that's going to spook people. I say we may have all grown up as the sort of that shows my age, Star Wars generation. That kind of shows it in there. In fact, I went to see that film as a child, shows how old I am. But it's, we're all assuming that it's somewhere in the computer. It's going to be able to answer what we want. And yes, to a point, we are creatures of habit. We leave indications of what we're doing all the way across the web, but it's being sensible in the way that you capture it, you store it, you use it, and you don't keep it beyond its sell-by date. Don't just have lots and lots of stuff on people, because that will spook people, make them uncomfortable. And we've seen that recently with all the stuff around cookies, etc., and why we've sort of moved away from offering that as part of our sort of DMP presentations.
Yeah, and that's why somebody is asking from the attendees, Clement, what about the data that is siloed? What about the data that is siloed?
I think in the data that's siloed from that point of view, what I can share with is what we're doing, which is we have sort of gone through our own journey as Oracle and Oracle's marketing. Clearly, we are a B2B marketer, so it's not quite the same as there. So in terms of what we've done is we've kind of acquired different and changed what we had in our sort of customer experience database, is what we called it. So it started its journey as very much sort of a traditional kind of marketing data warehouse with sort of the basic, relatively static data into it. Its second iteration was to then bring in more information around social, around channels and various other things. But what we've now seen it evolve into in its final, its most recent sort of evolution, is bringing in more and more insight and intent data that we're getting there. So things like Bombora, our own data Fox capabilities that are in there, more and more AI and modeling, so that when we're building a target audience that we're actually going to pursue within our database and what we're going to provide on that, actually bringing in some of the scoring so we can lift it, make it more self-service for marketers, and then being able to activate that. And that's the crucial piece now we're seeing as well. It's not just the data and holding the data. but it's also how do you activate that across the different channels and make it effective, or make it easier for the marketers to actually be able to access that and leverage that insight. So it's kind of, as one of my colleagues likes to say, a democratization of data and making it available to the people readily within the organization, albeit within the right secure parameters, etc. So we're managing it in a responsible way, but actually then getting that to the coalface to actually say, right, what is it we're going to do? How are we going to engage them? What's the best way to do it? What's the best channel? And making sure those feedback loops are today. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but hopefully of use.
I think for me also, there are two important things. One is having a collaborative kind of culture within the company, because ultimately it boils down to humans, yes. how effectively they share and collaborate on data. And I think second is also all these integrated automation tools and, marketing intelligence tools that are available really help a lot to facilitate that collaboration these days.
Yes, sure.
Like I think in your kind of an organization, it's very important, like the admin has different data and the finance has different set of data.
Yes, sure. Even though you have the HIS, the healthcare information system that have all the data of the real customers and patients. This one we integrated with, as you said, an AI, artificial intelligence, and programs like I mentioned before, the CRMs. These integrations helps a lot, really. Makes a big difference for getting the data personalization, as Andy said. Actually, it's throughout the obstacles in the sales channels, that can cause complications sometimes in the shopping experience of the customer. So it's also decrease the extraction of customers to get what they need. So it's very, very easy now. Yes.
Great. I also think while we are talking about all these things, everything, whether it's personalization or any technique that you're using, comes at a cost. The cost of technology, the cost of people who are driving it. So how do you measure the value of your investment in personalization? Like what kind of KPIs should be set to ensure, that you get maximum return on investment? Rania, let's start with you. Like how do you
actually, as a marketeer with the patient, let me say, our KPIs is different maybe than other industries. One of the most important thing is the awareness. KPI of awareness, talking about awareness, talking about what you have, how you will educate your patients, your customers. It's a sensitive relationship. So a KPI of awareness is very, very important for me. Yep.
But Dr. Bhaskar, what do you think? What should be the right KPIs to get maximum ROI?
So look, I'm slightly different because I'm a regulator. And from that perspective, we don't actually tend to measure things on ROI, but I would agree that we do spend quite a lot of money on awareness. You see, that's the whole point, both on the provider side as well as on the consumer side. A significant proportion of our marketing, communications, business development, outreach efforts is all about making sure that we educate people on how to use financial and corporate services in a safe and secure manner. So whilst we don't have dedicated KPIs for that, we do measure it in terms of how many people are dialing in for our webinars or people who are actually inquiring about us. So cases that are coming in, how many firms have been set up. So to summarize, we don't have any KPIs, but marketing data and for awareness purposes and educational purposes is used very, very heavily.
Andy, I think we'd also like to know from you, like how do you measure the value of personalization investment?
I think it's, again, personalization on all the things that we talk about, things like, for example, where we offer things like send time optimization and fatigue analysis. As I say to many of the clients that I talk to, you've got to have that measurement culture in there anyway. So in a sense of what matters to you, not just, and again, making sure this links all the way through to the board level, is if it's the marketers, does the board see or understand how it works all the way through the system, from campaign level metrics up to the more summarized board level metrics? And when you've got that framework, you can then start to measure the difference. So when you bring in things that offer more personalization, so clearly last year we launched sort of send time optimization. Here we're talking about orchestration and email and those sorts of things. So for the leading clients, people like Sage accounting software, for example, they've been able to say, okay, this is what our typical campaigns are offering, and the things that are almost like always on nurturing and things that are there. And you can start to measure then what the added value is of providing that level of AI and ML on top of it. What are the uplifts you can actually get? What benefit does it have to be able to include fatigue analysis? How much contact of your database been receiving, and what the impacts are? And you can see sort of doubling and trebling of response rates when you start to bring in these incremental changes, because you've got that measurement framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So any concrete sort of example that you have seen, like within your organization or the organizations that you work with, specifically in the region? I think our audience is more interested in knowing about the regional success stories.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not probably as au fait with some of the regional ones as I perhaps should be. So I do apologize, and I'm not sure I can offer right now anything specific on that one.
I can give examples if that works. Sorry. So we do regulate firms. So for example, we've got quite a lot of robo-advisors or digital investment managers. In fact, they have built businesses around marketing and leveraging data. So for people, you and me, you sign up, you explain what your risk appetite is, and they mine the data using AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to understand the capacity of you to take risks and offer investment advice. And it's a measure. I mean, like if you are able to go out and actually mine the data and then provide them with good advice, you are able to generate more revenue. So that's one example. Another example is, if I may, we just crossed 300 startups in our jurisdiction. Quite a lot of them are edutech or medtech, logistics, etc., etc. And they are all pretty much using the data on customers to educate them or to provide medical services or logistical services, etc., etc. So the first and foremost thing is, what is the cost of sales and what is the revenues that you're getting from the customer? And based upon what I'm seeing from my firms, there's some very, very funky stuff and interesting and productive stuff coming out from the firms that we regulate.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, Rania. You wanted to say
Actually, something? Yes. I have a very nice story to tell about when we start to use the artificial intelligence. Actually, the non-invasive treatment become like booming. It's not talking about, like, let me say, plastic surgeries, the non-invasive things. Once we try to do the awareness about it, talking about it, get some information, education, the booming through this were like really interesting. People become through the digital marketing, asking about things, about doctors, about treatments, about things maybe they don't need to come and ask through as a walk-in patient. So yes, this was very interesting.
That's amazing. And also, as a being a marketer myself, I feel that scalability is probably, and we started with that. I think, Andy, you covered a lot in your presentation. I think scalability is probably one of the biggest challenges in employing. I mean, there are data challenges, there are privacy-related challenges, but I think when you are employing an organization-wide personalization strategy, scalability, whether in terms of content management scalability or performance scalability is quite a struggle for organizations. So how do you suggest organizations manage that? And, you know, what is your experience so far? Like, how have you been able to tackle these two areas? Andy?
Yeah, I think as you were sort of saying there, it is a challenge. You know, personalization, as you've already identified, is the culmination of a number of things. As you said, you've got to have a scalable content delivery strategy. If you're going to offer any personalization, you've got to have the relevant data to be able to then place that message. Again, it's back to this right time, right message, right channel, the whole biggest issue around delivering on the promise of sort of the experience economy. All those things are in place. And I think it's just being, you've got to be focused on this. And they say you can't boil the ocean. You're going to have to be very clear on what segments you're going to tackle first and how you're going to do it. So I don't think there's a silver bullet to it. I think, as you've already said, you've got to make sure you're capturing, for first thing, what are you doing on the data front? Do you have enough to be able to personalize that journey and what they're actually doing? And I think, as you said, is if you personalize it, who are the people that you're actually targeting? What do we know about this audience? What content have we got then? And how do we generate content at scale? That's a real challenge, as you've said, for many organizations. You've got to think a little bit outside the box as to how you leverage your sort of subject matter experts and how you find ways of not just relying on your very expensive agency to generate content, depending on what industry and market you're in. But if you're in an area where you've got specialists inside your organization, how do you leverage that and make that a resource? So I'm thinking here about the Dave Meerman Scott book, the New Rules of Marketing and PR, and it talks about Meerman Scott's sort of journey that he went on of how do you unleash the internal subject matter experts, how do you capture that and make that available in all your different channels? So, you know, that long tail of marketing, just focusing on content for a minute, how do you get the stuff that's the very high impact stuff? So I'm thinking, Rania, from your perspective in the medical area, you know, what's the deep white paper that you might have, or, you know, deep thing you want to push out there, but how do you then repurpose that across all your channels? You want ways of making that a tweet, you want ways of making that an email, you want that as an article, you want it as
absolutely.
You've got to find ways of doing that part of it. And then it's, as you say, how do you place it at the right time in the right channel? And again, it's just using, I mean, technology, we are a technology vendor, but technology is not the be all and end all of it. We're talking here about a whole process. This is a whole thing of, you know, the people, the process, the data, the technology, the content, all that fits together. So I'm not sure that, so to say, it's not a silver bullet from my perspective. So it's quite a number of issues, but like all things, have a clear strategy and think how you can actually deploy that strategy in a sensible way that you can then deliver the results and scale it. So whether it's a particular business unit, a particular area, a particular sector of clients that you want to go after, you know, pick your battles accordingly, but then think, how do you develop this over time? I talk a lot about crawl, walk, run with clients. You know, what are the things that you need to do to get the basics right, which might be just getting, for example, a couple of channels working effectively, get your email channel and your web channel coordinated and working together, and take it step at a time. As I said, can't boil the ocean.
True, can't boil the ocean. And Rania, your last, I think we only have 4 minutes. So I would say your last word on how to achieve a successful personalization at scale.
Actually, you have to have a personalization strategy. First of all, this strategy will help a lot, will get you with the KPIs we talked about, okay, both, okay, all together, you will work on like a big digital marketing strategy that will increase your ROI definitely.
Great. And Dr. Bhaskar, your last words on how to achieve successful personalization at scale, or any example that you have seen you would like to share. You're on mute, Dr. Bhaskar.
Oh, sorry. So I would say, again, from a regulatory perspective and the fact as to where we are based, we actually encourage all our firms to be global. So the default has to be that you can't actually think about a very small market. Abu Dhabi is not for that. Abu Dhabi is based for firms who want to be global. So by default, we want to actually encourage to start at very large scale, sell to the entire world, and encourage them to do that because they have the comfort that the legal and the regulatory jurisdictions allows them to give that comfort. So if I look at my firms who are operating from here, they are operating from an offshore center and they offer their services all around the world. And it's doing pretty good. Whether we are talking about crypto assets, whether we are talking about digital investing, whether we are talking about e-commerce, whether we are talking about edutech, health tech, world's the oyster. You have to think scale.
Yeah, true. So think global, have the right strategy in place, have the right data tools, automation techniques in place. And I think it's also about, marrying your data to the technology that you're using in the right way. There are some kind of key takeaways for me as a marketer on achieving successful personalization at scale. Thank you so much, everybody. And Faris, thanks, Andy, Dr. Bhaskar, Rania, for joining us today. Faris, over to you.
Great. Well, again, thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the session. I know I certainly did. So I'd like for everyone to stay tuned for more content, of course, and we look forward to seeing you again for future webinars. I'd like also to thank Oracle for organizing this, and yes, thank you, and see you all very, very soon.